Hello, my name is Randy Orwin, and I'm the Assistant Director for Learning Technologies at the Information School here at the University of Washington. As you know, the UW is requiring that all classes for spring 2020 be taught remotely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I have created this short workshop, Introduction to Teaching Your Course Online, to make an attempt at providing some pointers, recommendations, and suggestions that might help you as you prepare to teach your face-to-face course remotely. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So we've had the little welcome. I'm going to talk a little bit about a communication plan that you can use in your course because communication is so key in an online environment. Then we're going to talk about MVP. Then we're going to take a look at content and delivery mode. So it's all about communication. So one of the things we want to do is look at updating your Canvas site so that you have really good information on your Canvas site as you take a look at preparing to teach your residential course in an online manner. So you want to update your contact information with the things that are showing on this slide, but rather than just show you on this slide, let's go ahead and talk about showing you the actual Canvas page to make that happen. So here's a sample Canvas site that you can take a look at. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll zoom in on this. And you can see in my instructor and TA information section, the first thing is there's actually a photo of me, and then it has my email address. It says virtual office, so what you're going to find is this actually is the actual link to my Zoom room that I'm going to use in this course. Shows my virtual office hours. I actually have a link to the course Zoom meeting room, so in case you decide to do synchronous presentations, you can actually just put that link on the course homepage. Students don't have to go looking for it. They can just click on it and away they go. A couple of things that we've created here at the iSchool that really make the whole Zoom thing a little bit better is we have a pre-meeting checklist, and this is for those people who've not used Zoom before. It gives some links on where to download the Zoom client, those types of things. So you may have a link to that on your page, but more importantly, so we have created a Zoom participants guide, and this guide provides information about everything a student needs to know if they're going to participate in a Zoom meeting. All right, so that's kind of the basics of setting up your Canvas page as you do that. The other thing you want to have is you actually want to have a communication plan. So we'll just kind of pop back over here to the slides. And so with your communication plan, you have to decide how you're going to distribute those course updates, that one directional type of thing that you're going to send out to everybody, and we'll talk about that. You want to figure out how can students ask general questions as they kind of move through the class. And when I look at general questions, it's the type of question that any student may have, but oftentimes they're afraid to ask. So they need to ask those things. And then how are they going to communicate privately with you as the instructor? So we're going to go back to our training demos site, and I'm actually going to take a look at my syllabus where I've created my communications plan. So at the communications plan, one of the first things that I really recommend people do is for any of those kind of course information where you send stuff out to students in a one-directional manner, then what I look at is the Canvas announcements feature. So if you look up here, it's usually one of these links up here at the top, so Canvas announcements. And that's a really positive thing that you should probably have and use that. And I recommend this because students have notifications set up in Canvas, and they can get those as an email or wherever they want to get them. But it gives you a historical record of everything that happens in your Canvas site when it comes to Canvas announcements. The other thing that I like to do is I like to see the last 2 or 3 announcements actually show up on the course homepage automatically so students don't miss them. So if I go back to this home page here, it shows my recent announcements. Very creative here. And to do this, you can actually go into your course settings. So the left-hand navigation bar, you have settings, and then you're going to scroll down to the very bottom down here, and you're going to click on the more options. And when you open up more options, there is the show recent announcements on the course homepage. I've set mine to 2. Some people will set it to 3. I wouldn't recommend any more than that because it takes up too much of the course homepage. Once you've ticked the box, set the number, then you can just click the Update Course Details button. And now your course is configured so that when you click on the Home button, I will have 2 of the most recent announcements sitting at the top. All right, so back to the syllabus. The other piece that you want to look at is that discussion board for general course questions. And I always put a link to that in the syllabus as well as where it will show up in the discussions link. But if you put it right in here, it's easy for students to find it. And basically it's just, if you have a question that you think anyone else in the class may have, be helpful, add it to this discussion board. Then encourage students to actively participate in the board. Have them answer those questions. Get them to take some responsibility for that, and that actually helps build that community feel in your site. Now, if it's something that's really quite important and you don't want to wait for students to answer those questions, you can always jump in and you can actually provide that. But generally, you may wait for a few hours and see if another student actually does that. But the idea is to build a culture around everybody helping everybody else inside the course. All right, so back to the syllabus page here. Then you have office hours. And office hours are quite important. Usually office hours are some sort of synchronous activity. And if you can do it, I recommend that you actually do a Zoom session with video turned on for all participants. Because you're in a remote course, video helps build that feeling of connectedness between you and your students and other students as well. So encourage people to turn the video on. Now, if you don't have really good, solid internet and students are struggling, you could actually do a text-based chat using Zoom where it's just text-based chat, or there are lots of tools. There's actually a chat tool in Canvas that you could use, and that works pretty well too. But make sure that you invite students to come, even if they don't have questions directly related to your content. You want to build that relationship with students. So invite them in, they can sit and they can have a conversation with you about your research or your areas of expertise, or even for that matter, your favorite hobbies and things like that. It's all about building that feeling of connection between you and your students, and also between student to student. So that's where the synchronous bit comes in and is important. You may not teach a lecture synchronously throughout the whole course, but you want to have those synchronous areas where you can actually touch base, check in, and do those kinds of things. Now, the last little one here is direct contact. And with direct contact, we usually think about 2 different methods where students can reach out to you with very specific questions related to their needs. And I recommend that you use the Canvas Conversations tool, or it's more commonly called the Canvas Inbox. And that's the one that shows up here in the global navigation menu. And so when you open that up, then you'll actually have your Canvas Inbox. That's the best way to go because that's FERPA compliant. And that means that any student data and everything is protected with our license agreement with Instructure, the parent company of Canvas. Some people will use email, and email is just fine as well, but you need to understand that email is not FERPA compliant. And so anything that is in your email, you can almost consider that to be public, because somebody could actually make a public records request, and then you would have to turn over all of your email, which means somebody's going to have to redact all of that information that has about students. So The recommendation is use the Canvas conversations or your Canvas inbox as your best way to communicate. Now, whatever you decide to do, as you look here in my description, whether you're using the inbox or you're doing email, this section right here is really important. Make sure that your students list the term, so spring 20, the course prefix and the number, followed by whatever their subject is. So on the example here, spring T-Demos 19, and then a subject following that. This makes it very, very easy for you to track any mail related to that particular course. So if you're teaching multiple courses, you can actually do a search on that term and the course number, and you're going to be able to find all email related to that thing, or all things in your inbox related to that thing. So that's a really recommendation that I would give to you at this point in time. All right, so that kind of covers the area that we're talking about here. So let's go back in, and here's the bottom line. No matter what you do, make sure that you communicate clearly so the students know how, when, and why you are communicating. It's all about being clear, and I encourage you to communicate clearly and communicate frequently so that your students are in the know of what's going on. All right, so let's move on to the next component of this. The other piece, as you start out with your course, you want to build that community, as I've mentioned already. So make sure that you come up with some kind of activity that students can use to introduce themselves to the class. There are a number of ways that you could do that. You could set up a Canvas discussion board, and then your discussion prompt actually talks about, here's what I want you to tell the class about yourself. It could be you ask them to turn on their camera and do a 30-second camera thing. Here at the iSchool, we use a tool called VoiceThread, and this is a great way to set that up because students can use video, they can use audio, or they can use text. So you can actually do a video of yourself introducing yourself, and then the students could either add a new slide to that slide deck if it's not too big, or they can actually make a comment on an individual slide. But you want to make sure that you do some sort of activity that will allow students to introduce themselves. And if you can get a little bit of video or a photo or something that will help make that connection with them, that's really, really key. All right, let's move on. All right, so if we were going to do a course design in a very traditional manner, and we were going to take your residential course and we were going to turn it into an online course, this is kind of the process that we would do. It would take 4 to 6 months of really hard work as we look at everything that's required. During that 4 to 6 months, we're going to create measurable outcomes. So what will your students know and be able to do at the end of that course? So those would be course level outcomes. And then you're going to actually take a look and you're going to go to module level outcomes. So in every module, you're also going to have a set of things that your students will know and be able to do. But the key is you want to make those measurable. Once you've created your outcomes, then you have to look at curriculum alignment. And this curriculum alignment basically says, how am I going to assess that the students know and can do those things? So you have to create your assessments based around what your measurable outcomes are. And then if your program has program level outcomes, then we would actually make you map all of those outcomes through each module up through the course and then up through the program level. So it's a very, very detailed process just to get ready. And then actually once you've done all of that curriculum alignment, then you're actually going to create the content to figure out how you're going to teach all of that information so the students will get it, and then we're going to worry about making it really engaging. Then you're going to try and decide, what are your delivery models? Is it going to be asynchronous, recorded lectures? Are you going to do live stuff? So lots of different things to think about. Unfortunately, we don't have time to even think about any of this stuff. So here's a new term that some of you may not be familiar with, MVP, minimum viable product. So in this situation, we want to make sure that you're covering the big things of your course that students will know and be able to do at the end of the course, but you may not be covering everything. So I want you to keep this MVP at the back of your mind, because it's really important that you don't get a mindset of you're going to try and teach everything that you would normally teach in your face-to-face class. Given the short window that we have, given the fact that you've probably never taught online and a lot of your students have never taken an online course, it all comes back to MVP. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind, MVP. So when we look at the considerations for the content that you're going to put into your online course, your remote course, um, review the major course outcomes. Again, what will students know and be able to do? And these are the big overarching concepts that at the end of the course they should know and be able to do. There might be some of the minor detail things that may not work out, but these are the big ones. And so really take a look at those big ones and decide, which areas am I going to focus on? Then take a look at your content and review that content by week. So what you're going to do in your face-to-face class, see if that content closely aligns with a major outcome. If it doesn't align closely with one of those outcomes, then seriously consider removing it from your course. As you think about those outcomes, if it's a required course, you probably don't want to cut any major outcomes without some serious thought. And if you're thinking about that, you may want to reach out to your program chair, or you may think about the people who are going to teach the next course in a series, so that you make sure that the students still have enough information to move forward in the next course in a series. So if it's a required course, cutting major outcomes might not be a great idea. If it's an elective, you do have a little more flexibility in working around those outcomes. Because it is an elective, and oftentimes electives are just taught by the same person all the time, then you can be real flexible in where you want to focus your efforts in trying to get that content out to the students. So those are your kind of content considerations. The other thing to think about is, what are the major assessments? What are those things that students are going to do to prove that they know and can do the stuff that are in your outcomes? And pick those major assessments. Then also take a look at the larger assignments and make sure that you focus on those assignments that are going to help students get into those major outcomes that you're looking at. Once you've taken a look at the assessments that students are going to do and the types of assignments that they're going to do, document that stuff, add them to your syllabus, or add it to the Canvas site on your course homepage, or as part of that syllabus. And then try and have most of this information available at the start of the quarter. Now, given the time frame we're in, that may not be the case. So I would seriously look at the first 2 weeks. That's very, very important. Look at that first 2 weeks. Get those figured out. Any assessments, any assignments, any synchronous activities, any asynchronous activities that you're going to do, if you're going to record lectures, make sure you got that first 2 weeks figured out, and then you can be working on those things as you move forward. Now you have to decide, are you going to do synchronous or are you going to do asynchronous? And there are some things to seriously think about when you start looking at the synchronous versus the asynchronous. Some people believe that synchronous is really the best way to go, and that's the way you should be doing it. So you could be doing a Zoom live session where you actually teach the content, you deliver it as if you're standing in front of the class. That's great. The problem is, during the pandemic right now, if you have international students, a lot of those international students have gone home. A lot of the students that live in the US have gone home as well, and they may be on the East Coast. And so time zones become a real serious issue when you start trying to do synchronous. The other thing that you may be looking at is, do students actually have a device that's going to let them do Zoom, and do they have a good enough internet connection and enough bandwidth that they're allowed to use on whatever plan they happen to have? So there are lots of things in synchronous that you need to seriously think about. Now, if you're worried about time zones and some of the other issues we just talked about, you might want to look at using your office hours as a synchronous approach to at least getting some of that synchronous face time in. My recommendation with your office hours would be to actually schedule your office hours a couple of times a week at different times of the day so that students in different time zones can try and make an effort to come and meet with you. Another option to think with synchronous is you could say on a synchronous meeting, you're just going to do an introduction to a particular bit of content, and then you can release the students. They can do some asynchronous activities, and then you can bring them back at the end after they've had a chance to do the asynchronous work, and you could have a follow-up and say, let's talk about what your experience was during this session. So some very important things there. Now, the other option is you could do a predominantly asynchronous environment, and then you can do recorded lectures and recorded tidbits of information, and then send that out to students. And then after they've had an opportunity to watch that, then you have activities that you can engage them in either some collaborative work with other classmates, so some group work, collaborative document types of things. They could be doing a project where they're actually going to produce a video, anything like that that's going to engage the students throughout that, with the understanding that at the end of the quarter, they'll know and be able to do those things that you're looking at. So which are you going to actually use? That may not be entirely up to you. So you may depend on your program chairs, whether they have recommendations on how to move forward. They may have some sort of an idea that says you're going to have an hour of synchronous lecture a week, and you're going to have an hour of online office hours, or they may say, we're going to leave it up to you to see how that works. So you may actually look at surveying your students, finding out what time zone they're in, what difficulties will they have, are they at home with a large family and there's 5 kids trying to get online at the same time. So lots of things to consider in this unprecedented time across the world right now. There are lots of other issues that people are going to be dealing with in doing a remote class that they wouldn't normally have to deal with in other times. So think about all these things. They're very important to think about. So first 2 weeks, think about how you would be delivering that content in a normal face-to-face. If you're in a large lecture hall, do you lecture the whole time? Do you have short bits of lecture and then you have hands-on activities? So think about what you would do in your face-to-face, how you engage your students, what activities, what assignments, and then try and think, how can I deliver those things online? How do I make modifications? So if it's not going to be a face-to-face thing, I might be able to do a short 10 to 15 minute lecture, and then I could have students do collaborative work. I can send students out to do discussion board posts, do readings, all of those types of things. So in that first 2 weeks, kind of get your feet wet. Try and think about how you're going to do that. How am I going to present this content synchronously or asynchronously? Really, really key. And with some of the guidelines that have come out from the president and the provost, especially for undergrad classes, think of the first week as an opportunity for everybody to get their feet wet. Experiment with whatever digital tools that you happen to be using. Communicate with your students about what your syllabus look like, how are those things going to happen, and use that beginning of the quarter to really kind of figure out what are you actually doing. So that's really key. So some examples of what you might be doing. So let's say here's a synchronous example. You're going to give a live lecture in Zoom. You're going to spend about 15 minutes. Within Zoom, you actually have the ability to do breakout rooms. So you could break students out into breakout rooms. They could spend 10 minutes working on something in that breakout room related to your content. And then they could come back into the normal Zoom room, and you could have them share their screens. They could do video, whatever. So they're sharing with the rest of the class. Then you have somebody that's actually capturing all these reports, or you're recording that Zoom session, which, by the way, you should be recording all sessions. Then you could have a bit more live lecture, and then you can give a nightly assignment, a lot of readings and stuff, especially in the grad level courses. And then they could be posting something in a graded discussion board. So that's a synchronous example of something that you could do. An asynchronous example, you could have 15 minutes of recorded lecture. Then students have to go and listen to that lecture, go to a discussion board, respond to the discussion questions related to that lecture. There could be a bit more lecture, some required readings. You could put students into groups of 2 or 3, and they can actually do some problem solving and work on suggestions for solutions. They could add their solution as an infographic to some sort of a shared presentation. And then they can review presentations and do peer review of students in other 2 groups. So all done fully asynchronously. So some things to consider. Create a roadmap for each weekend module indicating the estimated time for each activity. So students have a really clear idea of how much time and effort is going to be involved in each one of those things. So here we're saying, we know it's going to be a 15-minute lecture. We figure they're probably going to spend about 30 minutes on the discussion board. More lecture, they're going to spend about 40 minutes doing reading. They may spend about an hour working as a team, another hour working on trying to get an infographic put together as a group, and then they may spend another hour reviewing other people's work as peer review. So for this particular module, we're looking at approximately 5 hours for this. And that gives students a pretty good idea how to allocate their time. All right, so that kind of ends the presentation. So let's, if you have questions, you can shoot me email or whatever. I'm happy to answer those questions. So just let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for joining me.